is with you what cannot be done. Hear you nothing that I say? You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
Hello. Today's topic is the US dollar. To understand the dollar, you have to understand history. And you also have to understand what money is. So here we go.
Well, I want to explain to you just how money rose to play such a terrifyingly dominant role in all our lives. What's more, I want to reveal financial history as the essential backstory behind all history. Banks financed the Renaissance, while the bond market decided wars. Stock markets built empires, and monetary meltdowns made revolutions. From ancient Mesopotamia right down to present-day London, the ascent of money has been an indispensable part of the ascent of man. But money's rise has never been a smooth upward ride. As we'll see, financial history has repeatedly been interrupted by gut-wrenching crises, of which today's is just the latest. From the fluctuating prices of the homes we own to the high-speed industrialization of China, the power of finance is everywhere we look, and it affects all of our lives. But are you in on the secret? Do you know what causes a bank run or a monetary meltdown or a stock market crash? Can you tell the difference between a subprime loan and a prime loan? Well, I think these financial technicalities only really make sense once you know where they came from. And that's why financial history is of more than merely academic interest. Not knowing this stuff can seriously damage your wealth. Crisis or no crisis, the amount of money sloshing around planet finance still boggles the mind. By one measure, the US stock of money is now $8.7 trillion, up 12% since last year. And some people are still pocketing a huge share of that cash. Last year, despite the onset of the biggest financial crisis since the Depression, his hedge fund paid George Soros a cool $2.4 billion. That's roughly 41,000 times more than the average American family earned. As they say on Wall Street, way to go. Now, however, imagine a world with no money. 500 years ago, the most powerful society in South America, the Inca Empire, had no real concept of money. The Incas appreciated the aesthetic qualities of rare metals. Gold was the sweat of the sun, silver the tears of the moon. Labor was the unit of value in the Inca Empire, just as it was later supposed to be in a communist society. But in 1532, the Incas ran into a man whose hunger for money had led him across an ocean. Francisco Pizarro and his fellow conquistadores had come from Spain to what they called Upper Peru, inspired by the legend of El Dorado, the realm of the gold-covered king. After defeating the Inca army at the Battle of Cajamarca, their quest began in earnest. At Potosi, in what is now Bolivia, the Spaniards struck it rich. They discovered the Cerro Rico, literally the rich hill. Towering nearly 16,000 feet above sea level, it was a money mountain. In their 250 years of Spanish rule, more than 2 billion ounces of silver were extracted from mines like this one, 14,000 feet up in the Andes. What the Incas couldn't grasp was why the Europeans had such an insatiable lust for gold and silver. They couldn't understand that to Pizarro and the conquistadores, silver was much more than just shiny metal. It could be made into money. A store of value, a unit of account, portable power. I must say, I find this place pretty harrowing. The Spaniards had a system of forced labour, which meant that every able-bodied male in the native population had to do a stint down these mines. And you can see why 1 in 8 of them didn't survive the ordeal. Today, 500 years later, conditions for miners in the Cerro Rico haven't improved much. But at least they get paid for the work they do. In those days, it was a way of making money that verged on genocide. The silver ore was ground up, refined with mercury, and then shipped to Europe as bars and coins. Empire, it seemed, had made the Spanish crown rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And yet all the silver in the mines of Potosi couldn't halt the inexorable economic and political decline of Spain's empire. Why was that, when Pizarro seemed to have struck it so incredibly rich? The answer is that the Spaniards had dug up so much silver to finance their wars of conquest that the metal itself suffered an extraordinary decline in value. More silver coins didn't make Spain richer. They simply made prices higher as an increased quantity of money chased the same amount of goods. What the Spaniards didn't get was that money is only worth what other people will give in exchange for it. And whether money takes the form of silver coins, seashells, bars of gold, or banknotes, that's been true from ancient times right down to the present day. Even lumps of clay can work better than silver coins if people have enough confidence in them. In ancient Mesopotamia, nearly 4,000 years ago, people used clay tablets like these ones to commit themselves to particular financial transactions. For example, this one, found a little southwest of Baghdad, specifies that a debtor will repay a lender 330 measures of grain on the harvest day. But this one's even more fascinating, because what it says is that a debt of 4 measures of barley should be repaid to the bearer of the clay tablet. And it's that idea of repayment to the bearer that really fascinates me. If the phrase sounds familiar, then it should. Just take a look at a £20 note. Banknotes have next to no intrinsic worth. They're simply promises to pay, just like the clay tablets of ancient Babylon 4 millennia ago. On the back of the $10 bill, it says, "In God we trust." But it's not really God you're trusting in. By swapping your goods or your labour for a fistful of these things, you're trusting the US Treasury Secretary not to repeat Spain's mistake and produce so many of the damn things that by the time you come to spend them, they're worth even less than the paper they're printed on. Today, we're quite happy with paper money. Even more amazingly, we're happy with money we can't even see. Millions of dollars pass through this woman's hands every day. Or rather, across her computer screen. She's a foreign exchange dealer whose business is literally buying and selling money. Each day, around $3 trillion changes hands in transactions like these around the world. And it's all built on trust. It has to be when you can't even touch the stuff. That's what the conquistadores got wrong. They failed to see that money is about trust, even faith. Trust in the person paying you the money, trust in the central bank issuing the money, trust in the commercial bank that honors the check. Money isn't metal, it's trust inscribed, and it doesn't much matter what it's inscribed on. Paper, silver, clay, or a screen, provided the recipient believes in it. There was one huge possibility created by the emergence of money as a system of mutual trust. A possibility that would revolutionize world history. It was the idea that you could rely on people to borrow money from you and pay it back at some future date. That's why the root of credit is credo, the Latin for I believe. Without the invention of credit, the entire economic history of our world would have been impossible. Because we take it for granted, we tend to underestimate the extent to which our entire civilization is based on the borrowing and lending of money. No, it doesn't literally make the world go round, but it does make vast quantities of people, goods and services go around the world, from Babylon to Bolivia. The puzzle is that the early moneylenders got so little thanks for their services. On the contrary, they were widely reviled as pariahs. Why was that? Welcome to northern Italy in the year 1200 AD. A land divided into multiple feuding city-states. A land where trust was in rather short supply. Among the many remnants of the defunct Roman Empire was a numerical system singularly ill-suited to complex mathematical calculation, let alone the needs of commerce. Nowhere was this more of a handicap than in Pisa, where merchants struggled to do business with 7 different forms of coinage in circulation. Even the simplest transaction could be a headache, requiring the use of an abacus. By comparison, economic life in the Eastern world, in the Muslim Caliphate or the Sung Chinese Empire, was far more advanced. To discover modern finance, backward Europe needed to import it. Enter a young mathematician called Leonardo of Pisa, or Fibonacci. The son of a Pisan customs official based in what is now Algeria, Fibonacci is best remembered today for his sequence of numbers that mimic the properties of nature. But the famous sequence was only one of many Eastern mathematical ideas that Fibonacci introduced to Europe with his path-breaking book, the Liber Abaci, the Book of Calculation. Even more important was his demonstration of the superiority of Arabic numerals over Roman numerals. And crucially, nearly all Fibonacci's examples related to business. Since Roman times, Europeans had been struggling to do simple arithmetic with these. The Hindu or Arabic numerals made all kinds of calculation easier. In particular, Fibonacci showed how the new methods of calculation could be applied to commercial bookkeeping, to currency conversions, and crucially, to the computation of interest. Just imagine trying to work out percentages in Roman numerals. Fibonacci's Liber Abaci made it child's play. This was to be the application of mathematics to making money. The most fertile soil for such financial seeds proved to be the Italian city-states. Fibonacci's hometown of Pisa was one, but it was above all Venice, more exposed than any of the others to Oriental influences, that became the great money-lending laboratory. And the home of literature's most notorious moneylender, Shylock, in William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice.
May you stead me? Will you pleasure me? Shall I know your answer?
Crucially, Shylock's only prepared to lend the money if Bassanio's friend, the merchant Antonio, is providing the security.
3,000 ducats for 3 months, and Antonio bound.
Your answer to that?
Antonio is a good man.
By good, Shylock doesn't mean virtuous. He means good for the money he's about to lend Bassanio. In other words, creditworthy.
Have you heard any imputation to the contrary?
Oh, no. My reason in saying that he is a good man is to have you understand me that he is sufficient. 3,000 ducats. I think I may take his bond.
With any loan, things can go wrong. Ships can sink. And that is precisely why anyone who lends money to a merchant, if only for the duration of an ocean voyage, needs to be compensated. We usually call the compensation interest, the amount paid to the lender over and above the sum lent, or principal. Overseas trade of the sort that Venice depended on couldn't operate without such transactions, and they remain the foundation of international trade to this day. But why does Shylock turn out to be such a villain, demanding literally a pound of flesh, in effect Antonio's death, if he can't fulfill his obligations? Why is Shakespeare's moneylender so heartless, the original of that blood-sucking financier who recurs time and again in Western literature? One clue is that Shylock is one of the many Jewish moneylenders in history. Jews who stayed in Venice for more than 2 weeks were supposed to wear a yellow O on their backs or a yellow hat, and they were confined to a special area which became known as the Ghetto Nuovo. This is the entrance to the Jewish ghetto in Venice, where Jews were obliged to live and indeed confined at night. Jews were tolerated in Venice, but for a reason. The key was that Jews could provide a service that Christian merchants were forbidden to do. They could charge interest on their loans. Fibonacci might have figured out the mathematics of lending, but it took Shylock to do the deal. This is where the Venetian Jews used to do business. This building here was the old Banco Rosso, and it was outside here that they used to sit, behind their tables, their tavole, on their benches, their banchi, the root of the Italian word for banks. Now, there was a good reason why merchants came here to the Jewish ghetto to borrow money. For Christians, what the Jews were doing, lending money at interest, was a sin. The medieval church's laws against usury, charging interest on loans, were a major obstacle to the development of finance in Europe. After all, what God-fearing Christian merchant wished to risk the torments of hell? This astonishing vision of eternal damnation was painted by Giorgio Vasari and Federico Zuccari on the inside of the great dome of Florence's cathedral, the Duomo. Down below, there's another fresco by Domenico de Michelino of Florence's greatest poet, Dante Alighieri, holding his masterwork, the Divine Comedy. According to Dante, there was a special part of the seventh circle of hell that was exclusively set aside for usurers. There, the moneylenders were eternally tortured with scorching earth and freezing snow, their necks weighed down with bulging purses. Jews too weren't supposed to lend at interest, but there was a convenient get-out clause in the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23. You weren't supposed to lend to your brother at interest, but to a stranger, well, that was a different matter. In other words, a Jew couldn't lend to a Jew, but he could lend to a Christian. The price the Jews paid for performing this service was social exclusion. Hence the ghetto, and hence the centuries-long association between Jews and finance, one of the few forms of economic activity from which Jews were not once excluded. In the end, of course, Shylock is thwarted, for although the court recognizes his right to a pound of flesh, the law also prohibits him from shedding Antonio's blood. And because he's a Jew, the law also requires the loss of his goods and life for so much as plotting the death of a Christian. He only escapes by submitting to baptism. It turns out to be a risky business to be a moneylender. The Merchant of Venice raises profound questions about both economics and anti-Semitism. Why don't debtors always default on their debts, especially when the creditors belong to unpopular ethnic minorities? Why don't the Shylocks always lose out? To get a better idea of how primitive money lending works, you don't need to travel back in time. There are plenty of modern-day Shylocks remarkably close to home. And they don't need to be Jewish to suffer a similar fate to Shylock. This is Shettleston in the East End of Glasgow. It's actually where my grandmother used to live. And I think with its distinctive steel shuttering, it's one of the grimmest places in the whole of Western Europe. In fact, average male life expectancy here is just 64, which is slightly worse than Bangladesh. That means that the average Shettlestonian doesn't actually live long enough to collect his state pension. You might think nobody would be mad enough to try and provide financial services here, but someone does. That someone is a loan shark. You give him your benefit card as security and he gives you a loan. On the day your benefit arrives, he gives you back the card and you go to the post office to get your money, repaying him the interest. It's a modern version of Shylock's business model. Usury is alive and well and living in Scotland. These are some pages from the loan book of a Glasgow loan shark, and it's kind of interesting to see how the business model works. You lend out maybe £10 to someone and you expect to be paid back £12.50 at the end of the week. Now that's 25% a week, but if you work that out as an annual rate, it comes to 11 million %. So why do people scraping by on just £5.90 a day pay such horrendous interest on loans? These surely are loans you'd be mad not to default on. Here in Glasgow, defaulting on your loan is highly inadvisable. You won't literally lose a pound of flesh, but grievous bodily harm isn't an unknown consequence of letting down the loan shark. Quite simply, individual loan sharks have to be rapacious and ruthless because the costs to them of even a single defaulter are so high. And that explains why, from Renaissance Italy to modern Scotland, the moneylender is so often a hated figure. He's providing a service, but at a socially unacceptable price. So how did lenders learn to overcome this fundamental problem? If they were too generous, they didn't make any money. But if they were too hard-nosed, borrowers would eventually default. The answer was to get bigger and more powerful. It was time to invent banks. In 15th century Italy, the key financial service of providing credit moved out of the ghetto to become the legitimate preserve of banks. This transition was symbolized by the rise of one family, the Medici. With their ascent, credit came of age. Money lending ceased to be disreputable. It became glorious, and the foundation of a new kind of power. The dazzling legacy of the Medici family's power still surrounds you in Florence today. In the space of 400 years, 2 Medici became queens of France, 3 became pope. Appropriately, it was Machiavelli, the supreme theorist of power, who wrote their history. Perhaps no other family left such an imprint on an age as the Medici left on the Renaissance. You might even say that they paid for the Renaissance, their patronage running the gamut of genius from Michelangelo to Galileo.
And this, in the Uffizi Gallery, is the Medici's private art collection, one of the most spectacular ever assembled.
What the millions of tourists who flock here generally forget to ask is how the Medici paid for all this. The simple answer is that they were foreign exchange dealers, members of the Arte di Cambio, the money changers guild, who made it big. They were known as banchieri or tavolieri because, like the Jews of Venice, they literally did their business sitting on benches behind tables. Indeed, the original Medici bank, or bench, was located right here in the Via dell'Arte della Lana, Woolgild Street. Prior to the 1390s, the Medici were Florence's answer to the Sopranos, a small-time clan notable more for low violence than for high finance. In a 17-year period, no fewer than 5 Medici were sentenced to death by the criminal courts for capital crimes. Then came Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici. It was his aim to make the Medici totally legitimate. Part of the secret of his success was an ingenious bit of creative accounting that got the Medici off the hook of the anti-usury laws.
These ledgers of the Medici Bank make it clear how important commercial bills for financing foreign trade were to the bank. True, the church prohibited the collection of interest on loans, but there was nothing to prevent a shrewd trader from making money on transactions like these, which involved multiple currencies.
There was no interest and therefore no sin, simply a commission deducted for the conversion of one currency into another. If money was advanced to a particular trader for any length of time, the commission was that bit larger. In the same way, depositors who put their money in the Medici Bank were given discrezione to compensate them for risking their money. This was credit, in other words, but with the interest payments discreetly concealed. Now, for the first time, money lending had evolved into banking.
The real story of the success of the Medici Bank can be found here in the Libro Segreto, the secret book of Giovanni de' Medici. The key was not so much size as diversification. Earlier Italian banks had been monolithic and very vulnerable to default by a single bad borrower. But the Medici Bank was made up of multiple interlocking partnerships, each in some measure independent of the rest. It was this decentralization that was the key to their astonishing profits.
Under Giovanni's guidance, the Medici banking network extended from Florence to Venice to Rome. The scale and diversity of the Medici's operations was the key to reducing the risks of money lending, and therefore also the costs to borrowers. That's the essential difference between loan sharks and banks, between Shylock and the Medici.
And here's the proof that it worked. Page after page of Giovanni's assets declared for tax purposes, and culminating in the grand total of 91,089 florins. In those days, that was serious money.
When Giovanni died in 1429, his last words were an exhortation to his heirs to maintain his standards of financial acumen. His funeral was attended by 26 men of the name Medici, all paying homage to the man who had made the business of banking respectable and profitable as it had never been before. For his son Cosimo, the accumulation of wealth combined seamlessly with the accumulation of power. Within 20 years of his father's death, Cosimo de' Medici was the Florentine state. As the Pope himself put it, political questions are settled at his house. The man he chooses holds office. He it is who decides peace and war and controls the laws. He is king in everything but name.
This Botticelli is mainly famous for the beauty of its young subject, but it's actually intended as a tribute to a dead banker, Cosimo de' Medici. That's him there on the medallion, and you can just make out the inscription Pater Patriae, the father of his country.
In 150 years, the Medici had transformed themselves from backstreet moneylenders to the most powerful financial force in Europe.
But it's this painting, Botticelli's Adorazione dei Magi, which more than any other captures the transfiguration of finance the Medici had achieved. On close inspection, the three wise men are Cosimo de' Medici washing the feet of Christ, and his sons Piero and Giovanni. The young man on the left is Lorenzo. The painting had been commissioned by the head of the Bankers' Guild as a tribute to the family. Perhaps it should really have been called The Adoration of the Medici. Having once been damned, bankers were now close to divinity.
Nothing could better illustrate the extraordinary ascent of money. For what the Medici had achieved was nothing less than the birth of modern banking.
Others had tried before, but the Medici were the first bankers to hit the political big time. And they did it by learning one crucial lesson. In finance, small is seldom beautiful. By making their bank bigger and more diversified, the Medici had found a way of spreading their risks. And by focusing on currency trading rather than just lending, they'd reduced their exposure to defaults by borrowers. For Cosimo and his family, it was a truly beautiful business model.
Yet not even the Medici were invulnerable. The bank suffered heavy losses as a result of over-generous loans to blue-blooded debtors who felt no compunction about defaulting on their obligations and telling the bankers to get lost.
It was the empire on which the sun never set, or as some said, on which the blood never dried. At its height, Britain ruled over a quarter of the world's population. Many convinced themselves it was Britain's destiny to do so. Much of the empire was built on greed and a lust for power. But the British came to believe they had a moral mission too, a mission to civilize the world. The builders of empire were bold. They were adventurous. Some were ruthless, and some were just a bit unhinged. The sheer expanse of British rule was breathtaking. It stretched from the wilderness of the Arctic to the sands of Arabia and the islands of the Caribbean. There was a time when Britannia really did rule the waves. And it's a memory which has never wholly faded. Once, the Navy imposed blockades, sank enemy vessels at will, suppressed slavery, mapped the world's uncharted oceans, and generally forced Britain's will onto foreign governments. That heritage helped Britain to believe she's still entitled to a place at the top table in world affairs. How did such a small country get such a big head? So much that shaped the extraordinary story of the British Empire was born here, in the complex, time-worn expanse of India. It was here the British learned the art of imperial power. Yet it was a treaty signed thousands of miles away that determined the fate of India. In February 1763, the great European powers were meeting in Paris to end years of war and to divide the world between them, from Canada to the Philippines. Britain's representative at the peace talks was the Duke of Bedford, a stubby, arrogant little man who'd never been to any of these places. In fact, his gout had made it difficult enough for him to get to Paris. But the Bedfords did pretty well out of the summit. The Duchess was given an 800-piece porcelain dinner service by the King of France, and the Duke got India for the British. The technologically advanced countries of Europe were eyeing up foreign lands for future conquest, and Britain had a head start. India was decisive. It gave Britain the resources, the markets, the manpower, and the prestige to build a worldwide empire. And in the years to come, they worked feverishly to secure that prize. First, Britain took control of the Mediterranean. Then they took the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa. Then Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. Then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, of course. And finally, Singapore. A web of strongholds right across the globe. This was the beginning of Britain's time as the undisputed top dog of the world. Yet the whole thing was built upon something decidedly fragile.
A small island like Britain couldn't by itself find the manpower to hold on to this vast new territory. So they came up with a system that would become a cornerstone of empire. They paid local soldiers to fight for them. British officers would now lead Indian troops. The colonized would provide the fighting force of colonialism for centuries to come. They paid local soldiers to fight for them. 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 They paid local soldiers to fight for them.
Soothe your pain. I won't ease your strain. I seek you out, flay you alive. One more word and you won't survive. And I'm not scared of your stolen power. See your eyes through you anyhow. I seek you out, flay you alive. One more word and you won't survive. And I'm not scared of your stolen power. See your eyes through you anyhow. I see. Survive, and I'm not scared of your stolen power. See your eyes through you anyhow. Failing any foe in my gaze. Steadily emerging with grace.
think my emotional state is separate from the diligence I put into making my work, because you know, part of being an artist is your practice should be, I think, a daily thing. You know, you go into the studio and you just work at it, and there's something kind of mechanical, unemotional about that process, but you still can't help to be human. So, you know, your body's just sort of this mechanical vehicle for your emotions, and you know, I keep trying to keep that vehicle operating on a daily basis, and you know, the fuel can be you know, it can be subdued, it can be angry, but hopefully it'll always run. My design philosophy is, I think, a concentration on aesthetics, on virtuosity, on the sublime, on profanity, and on the exploring the whole spectrum of visual communication and dreams.
뭐야? 꼴랑 혼잔겨?
왔냐? 너 정체가 뭐냐? 그 꼬마가 뭐라고 여기까지 온 거야?
옆집 아저씨.
옆집 아저씨? 너 도라이 정신병자지? 종석이 어딨어?
소미가 먼저다.
야, 받아. 비켜 이 새끼야. 무서워서 못 가겠다 야. 받아. 스트라이크? 걔가 천당으로 엄마 찾으러 갔어. 근데 눈깔이 없어서 못 찾아. 넌 사람 잘못 건드렸어. 옆집 아저씨? 장난치냐 이 개새끼야? 내 동생 어딨어? 내 동생 어딨어?
존치가 몇 개냐?
뭐?
나 전당 판다. 금리빨은 받아. 금리빨 빼고 무료로 씹어먹어 줄게.
새끼 이거 총 어디서 난 거지 이거? 야 형사인가? 뭐 하는 거야 새끼야 빨리 챙겨! 야 아까 지금 총을 맞아가지고 제가 안 죽어 이 새끼야 빨리 챙겨. 빨리 자, 이 새끼야! 경찰서죠. 여기 살인 사건이야. 빨리 와. 미친 짓을 하면 될 거 아니야. 빨리 와 이 새끼야. 왔어. 야 왔어. 빨리 와 이 개새끼야. 왔어. 왔어. 야 이 개새끼야! 이거 방탄유리야 이 개새끼야! 쏴! 쏴봐 이 개새끼야! 너 잡수면 끝났어 이 개새끼야! 나 안 나가! 이거 방탄이라고 이 병신아!
아직 한 발 남았다.